Today's episode is going to be about military tech and investment and the pace of change that's happening, not just on the Ukrainian side, but unfortunately on the Russian side as well. How technology is changing this war and how the furious pace of innovation is essential simply to keep a kind of stasis or balance on the front line. We're going to be digging into some of those details now. I'm going to ask both my guests to introduce themselves. We've got Deborah Fairlamb. I'll cut that bit out. We've got Deborah Fairlamb and Jan Saarinen, and they're going to introduce themselves in a minute. Before they do, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel, especially via Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and of course anyone who has subscribed or shared the materials around. As you all know, it's massively helpful, not just to keep this work going, but also to support the live events that we've been running around Europe and especially in Ukraine this year. And we have more events coming up in July. We'll be providing details of those on the channel in the coming days. Now let's jump into the topics. First, though, Deborah, could you give a quick introduction to yourself and the work you do?
Happy to. Thanks. And it's great being here with you today, Jonathan. My name is Deborah Fairlamb. I am a co-founder of a US-based VC venture capital firm. The firm is called Green Flag Ventures. We have two general partners. I am based here in Ukraine. My partner is based in the United States. We are investing in what we call dual use technologies here in Ukraine, Ukrainian founded companies that are working both on technology that is helping Ukraine win the war now, but also have the potential for growth outside of Ukraine once the hot phase or once this phase of what is happening is over.
And Jan, give us a couple of words about yourself and your extraordinary history in sort of finance and innovation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Deborah, good to see you both. My name is Jan Saarinen, and the company I represent is Double Tap Investments. It was founded 2 years ago together with Oles Kudoba from Kyiv and Mikko-Pekka Hanski from Helsinki, Finland. We're a company that invests in defense tech. I sometimes say offense tech because we're not in dual use. We're in as offensive as possible these days. Our first goal is to fight alongside with Ukrainians. The first goal of the company is to help Ukraine to win the war. Secondly, obviously, being a Finnish company, half Finnish, half Ukrainian. But we in Finland also want to learn of what Ukrainians are doing. We want to find the latest technologies and tactics that are functional against the huge enemy that we have common. Third of all, the third thing is that we believe that since we're an investment company, we believe that there's in the Ukrainian defense innovations, there's a lot of huge value that will be created in the coming years. Someone has been comparing it to Silicon Valley on the 90s or whatever the time. Jonathan knows better, but what was the peak time of the Silicon Valley? This will be maybe even bigger. When you mentioned about my background, for last 20 plus years, almost 25 years, time flies, but I've been in finance. I've been doing hedge funds. I've been a chief financial officer in a large company and stuff like that all around. But before that, I had some military experience. I spent a year in Africa and as a soldier, and about 2.5 years in Bosnia during the Bosnian crisis on early 90s, mid 90s, as a security military contractor. But this, I thought that I had left it behind me. But when this full-scale invasion in Ukraine started, I kind of activated again. And on the early days, I went to Kharkiv and started working in Ukraine. And so here we are now investing in the technology as lethal as possible, like I said.
That's interesting, isn't it? I know some people will sort of try to stick to the non-lethal, but actually Ukraine's survival, the survival of Ukraine's cities, civilians, culture, language, everything really rests on innovating lethality, let's say. Deborah, we've talked several times before, and if people are fascinated by this, they should definitely go back and watch our previous conversations. But what struck me in what you post and what we talk about is to the outside world, there's a sense that this is a war that's become a quagmire, that it's hit a sort of stasis or stagnation and this kind of stuff. Um, and that's a convenient narrative because it means that it can be thought of as sort of local. It means you don't have to really grapple with the extraordinary technological innovation that is maintaining the sort of apparent stasis. You have a very different perspective, though, being in Ukraine and seeing this extraordinary pace of innovation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's so interesting for me with what I see happening here, and then when I have conversations with potential investors or others on the outside, sort of what the perceptions are. And there's a number of things that I think a lot of people outside of Ukraine miss. One, to your point that this is sort of at a stalemate. If you go back to the beginning, Ukraine was not supposed to have survived for more than 3 days or 3 weeks, and we are now 3.5 years in. And that is really, due to a couple of things. One, just the absolute pure sheer determination of Ukrainians to not give up and to keep fighting no matter what. Two, partner support from, partner Western countries. I can tell you, being in Kiev, I am extremely grateful for air defense and Patriot systems. And three, to the point where this and how this war has now evolved, that this is really a very different kind of warfare that is happening than most people understand. And it's not that there are not still places for some of the traditional military kit that people think of in terms of tanks and things like that, but a tremendous amount of very close line frontline fighting is taking place with drones, with FPVs. There is much greater usage of fixed wing drones that are used for relays, for surveying and reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, that sort of thing. And so, that's just one piece. And that is the piece that people are most familiar with, is they think, oh, drones, Ukraine. But very often what they are missing is everything that's going on behind it. And that includes the electronic warfare and just the state of the electronic war that is going on, and how much, and this is what you just mentioned, Jonathan, how much of the Western kit that comes into Ukraine is not prepared for the electronic warfare that the Russians are using, for the GPS denied environments. And so the Ukrainians are constantly innovating to be able to respond to this war. And so there's change that happens on multiple levels. It's the technology, it's the tactics, it's the strategy, it's the products, it's the training for the guys who are using the products. And all of these things are happening concurrently. And the pace of this really is very hard to convey on a regular basis. Everybody outside of Ukraine goes on with their normal lives. And so, when Jan and Hiwa, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, or I talk to somebody, it's this challenge of how do we take this huge change and this huge amount of innovation that's happening and help convey it to people in a way that they understand that this is not just localized in Ukraine. This has huge ramifications for the West. And there's two big sides for that. So one, this is not just Russia fighting against Ukraine. The North Koreans have sent troops. Iran sends drones. China sends parts. I don't even know or want to guess who sends money. So this is not just Russia. It is them actually maybe lobbying this stuff, but there is a whole consortium behind them, which means they are not just giving Russia the kit, they are also learning from Russia. So there is that piece that's happening, and that has much bigger global implications outside of Ukraine. And then the other thing for the West that's really important is understanding that how they are going to fight the Russians or the Chinese or anybody on a close level battlefield is very, very different from anything they have ever done before. They are not ready in terms of the equipment. They are not ready in terms of the training, in terms of the tactics, the strategy, and all of these things need to be rethought. You can't just say, hey, we're buying some new drones. That is not even the beginning of what needs to be done in the West.
Well, we'll get into how broken procurement systems are. But Jan, you're from Finland. I don't even imagine, obviously I know this for a fact because I've worked with Finnish executives in the 90s, and even when Russia was ostensibly becoming a friend of the West, inverted commas, the Finnish people I worked with who were in St. Petersburg would constantly tell me never to let your guard down. yes, take the opportunities, but never fully let your guard down. And I think they were of the view that Russia could not be trusted, and they were, I'm going to say, hedging their bets, but they weren't sure whether the reforms were going to succeed and whether Russia was going to lapse back in totalitarianism. This was in sort of 1997, 98. So I think they kind of understood in a way that the rest of Western Europe has very, very slowly come to understand. So let's start with your perspective on not just technology, but also Russia and the proximity of Finland and the requirement to stay alert and have a, let's say, an innovative edge when you have such a neighbor.
Yes, yes. I don't know where to start, where to begin. It's in our it's in our blood. It's in your your mothers when they feed their babies in Finland. They teach them not to trust the Russians. Obviously, over the decades, Soviet Union propaganda had an effect as well, and surely there's been people naive or hopeful, thinking that oh maybe they will change. But I was just telling Deborah last week that I went to this opera festival in the middle of the Finland, in Savonlinna is the name of the city. They've had over 100 years ago they started having opera festivals in this medieval castle. Since 1967, it's been every summer, like the whole July. There's this top of the world class, best performance of opera in that castle in Finland. As I went there last week to see Macbeth, by the way, which is a little bit violent as it is as a story, but an excellent story. As I went there, and I was thinking, I tell Deborah what's this castle, but this castle was built almost 600 years ago against the threat from Moscow. Seriously. So, we have a long history. They've our neighbors, and they've been regularly over the history. They've walked across the border. They've tried. They've been successful, and they will try again. We always know that in Finland, you cannot build a bridge in Finland without having holes on the sides to fill explosives with. You know what I'm saying? Like it's in the law. We have shelters in every school. In Helsinki, I think the tunnels under Helsinki, there's shelters for 900,000 people. So we never, we always knew, and over the decades also in Finland, even if the government has been a little bit on the left side, or no matter what the political party has been in rule, we've been preparing. You know what I'm saying? Like so, it does go across the country, but this is where we come. What I always think when like you said, innovative atmosphere. What were the words you were using? Now, when we look at the way Ukrainians are fighting, it's a lot of the innovations, as we all know, they're actually happening on PhD level in universities. The research is being done there, right? What the innovations are happening in Ukraine on the battlefront, it's more of a combining existing technology with the tactics, and this is really interesting. They're solving the problems with the technology that exists. And that's when it comes to investing or when it comes to working together, when it comes to Finland learning from Ukrainians, I believe in finding the best teams who can solve the problem today. Then you can kind of think that most likely they're the ones who solve the problems tomorrow. Like Deborah was saying earlier, then Shaheds are developing. They're constantly being better and faster and more and different explosives. There's a big problem, big challenge to take Shahids down. Once we solve that problem, the enemy, Iran and Russia, together with Chinese technology, will build the next generation Shahed. They will be again faster, and we need better technology. You know what I'm saying? So we need to find the teams that can solve the problems today. This is what, as a Finn, also I'm interested in. Like I said, we're prepared. But we need to constantly learn, and then again, obviously, adjust tactics and technologies to finish, winter and forest and different situations. But I don't know if that answered your question. But
Yes, it helps. Yeah, it's a good way into the conversation.
Okay.
Deborah, we've mentioned Silicon Valley a couple of times, and what always struck me about being in that place And actually, it's maybe not dissimilar to other localities and points in history. One gets the impression that the time of the diarist peeps in London, the distances between people was not as great as it is now. I mean, not just geographically, but mentally. And you read the diaries, and there's this extraordinary ferment of exchanging ideas, discussing, not just, every now and then, but every single night over dinner, getting together, and this sort of furious effort to remake the world and reimagine the world. That's the impression I had sort of in Silicon Valley in the 90s. We're seeing the kind of the results now, but the foundations of that were held in networks and conversations. And it seemed that nobody was more than just, one or two connections away from everybody else. So it's a great way to exchange ideas. It's also a great way to reach out to people. What's the similarity and indeed the differences that you're seeing between that sort of Silicon Valley networking effect and what's happening in Ukraine?
What a great way to lead into that. Thank you very much. That's actually such a fun way to start. So I think one of the things that really sort of sets Ukraine apart right now, and it is a distinguishing feature that is almost impossible to replicate on the outside, is the collaboration of everything that's going on here. If you start with just again, go back to the very beginning of the war, this was an all-out effort from every civilian, every person who was signing up for the military to get out to the front. There were those pictures of the Bandera smoothies and all of these things. Everybody has been in this together since the beginning, and this is still very much true. The way this defense offensive tech ecosystem has grown has really been extraordinary unto itself. This is not the normal process of somebody in general staff says we need this, and then it goes down through the line and out for procurement. And no, from day one, what has been happening, this is, what had been a tremendous just civilian tech ecosystem, fintech and SaaS, and all of these great Ukrainian tech companies that were here and growing before the war. There was just this massive pivot when the war started. And many, many of those people just put their projects, their companies on hold, and have been working side by side with the soldiers, which is really what truly differentiates what's happening here. In the context of, exactly like you're saying, there's very close collaboration between what is normally wildly separate ecosystems. Nowhere else is the full-on tech ecosystem up right alongside these extraordinary soldiers who are out there seeing what the needs are and problem solving for very specific needs. And I think this is one of the things that distinguishes what's happening here from the outside. Now Europe is awash with all of these new defense tech companies, and my LinkedIn feed is just full of stuff. And I can just, go through and I'm like, no electronic warfare, they fly with GPS, this isn't going to work, it's a closed system. They can't, do any updates, anything like that. So it's off, off, off. And in the context of, the evolution and revolution of what's happening in military technology and its driving, this is the place where it starts. But in that context, over time, more people have started, actually, there were a lot of people here from the very beginning, but as people, like Justin and I with our fund launching here, Jan and his partners launching, starting to bring more funds into the ecosystem. One of the things that we also do, and Jan, I know you guys do this, and you actually say this as your stated second goal, which is super important, taking what's learned here and bringing it back up to Finland. When Justin and I started the fund, we did this very much with the idea that we wanted to be able to create connections between this ecosystem and the West, and whether it's the US or European partners. That's an extremely important piece. The other funny thing is, Ukraine is a huge country. It's really big geographically, but there are kind of spots that have become kind of these centers for communication. And so on any given day, if you are out in Kharkiv or you're in Kiev or Lviv or, in certain places out closer to the front, you could very easily be sitting at a table and have, a couple Ukrainians, several people who are international. You might have an investor, you'll have a number of soldiers. You'll probably have somebody from a representative of civil society. You'll probably have somebody who's there doing humanitarian work. You may have somebody who is, a poet or an artist trying to capture and convey all of this. And so it is this incredible melange of people who come together. There's an idea, new connections made, then people go off, and again, then there's a grouping, new ideas, new people. And this is Ukraine on a daily basis. And there is not much that is sort of pre-planned, because to what Jan had just said, and Jonathan, you alluded to earlier, the Russians and the rate at which they are, changing the technology that they are sending into Ukraine is just as fast as what's going on here. And the Shaheeds and how they have been upgraded, have made them much deadlier in terms of the hit capability. They've changed the way that they fly, so they are now flying above the traditional, the defense that Ukraine had established for the last 24, how many ever months it's been now, when they started using them. So, and Ukrainians are having to constantly respond. And again, it's not just, hey, does one person have an answer? Like, everything gets crowdsourced. When there's a problem to be solved, it goes out to the whole ecosystem. Everybody gives ideas back, and then they're kind of out to the front and tested. So yes, this is very much an ecosystem that works and thrives off of openness, collaboration, and sharing of ideas and passing things along.
I'd love to get your take on that, Jan. Your experience of more, let's say, sort of civilian investments. And here you've got an extraordinary conjunction, which you started to mention in your answer. Not only have you got the sort of tech ecosystem of entrepreneurship, you have civic society, which is people who are almost a conduit between the technologists, the military, the ideas. Often there'll be fundraising to try and make things happen in an environment that still does not have, huge investments, despite your sterling efforts. It's still fairly nascent in those terms. It's an incredible conjunction of several things coming together in parallel. How does that compare to your experience of sort of Western environments for tech investment?
Tech investment in general, or defense, maybe defense in
Military tech
particular.
investment, yeah, whichever
Yeah.
that's relevant, yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of things on my mind. If you don't mind, I'll start a little. Okay, thanks. Please, I sometimes talk too much, so just interrupt me if it's your
That's
show.
fine.
So
No, no.
always you're the boss. Um, okay, first of all, I start like this 100% what Deborah said. I fully agree, but so many thoughts pop in on my mind. One of them being that at the end, when Deborah talked about collaboration of the whole society, or what's the word you used, also goes with the investors, because there are not so many active ones out there. Green Flag and Double Tap, we're not huge yet. We're good size, but we're becoming like some of the major investors, operators in Ukraine. And even though Green Flag and Deborah talk about dual use, and we're maybe more offensive, I think the goal is the same. I think we're clearly going to the same direction. And also with our investments, obviously, when things change, there will be dual use functions. We're just not concentrating on them at this point. What comes to tech investments, the way I see it, how I think of it is, in, like I said earlier, in Ukraine, a lot of times the existing technology is combined with the tactics. Battlefront is super dynamic. It's changing, every minute or every day, or it's really product development often talks about iteration. Like circle. Like your product. You develop something, you put it on test, you get feedback. It's actually like a never-ending loop. It doesn't even stop. Like the development is like constant. So you have to work with the military, with these active soldiers, not just ex-soldiers, but active soldiers. Often the product needs to be somewhat open, if you get what I mean, like not fully finished when you give it to the military, and then it gets developed further. It's Russians do this as well. My experience, my feeling, whether it's a fact or not, but the way I see it, the Russians are not as innovative as Ukrainians. They don't need to be, because we're talking about unmanned technologies mainly. And Russians obviously have a lot more manpower. So, like small nations like Finland, we have 5.7 million people. Ukrainians at the moment, I don't know, around 40 million. But we're still small nations. So we really need this unmanned technology, obviously, because the war is asymmetric, right? So Russians are not as innovative, but once they find something that works, they're very good at ramping up the production. And then look at the drones on fiber cables, or what do you call it, fiber optics. Once they realized like a year ago that they actually work, they've been coming up with tens of thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, and obviously the fiber coming from China. That's clear. What comes to funding, couple of again, I'm rambling a bit. Hopefully, it's kind of logical, my thinking or whatever comes out of my mouth. But when it comes to funding, the money itself, there should be more. One of the reasons why Green Flag and Double Tap can cooperate is that there's so much to do. There's a lot more opportunities than investors at the moment. A lot of the units, they started as a little bit like volunteer units, maybe even 11 years ago when this war first started. And they've developed into more organized units, even brigades. You know what I'm saying? So they actually have sponsors. They could have corporate sponsor or wealthy individuals sponsoring these units. They get like municipal, like local towns or areas of Ukraine can support some of the battalions. Me as a Finn, again, in Finland, this is unheard of. I could not think of a Finnish brigade on the eastern border of Finland being sponsored by Nokia. You know what I mean? It sounds, but in Ukraine, this is happening. And then on top of that, you get NGOs, you have VCs, different investors, different, so it's really, and the government, they've like Brave One, as an example, is giving them funding and supporting the startups in many ways. So it's quite of a complex system. And at the same time, I think what I've seen in 3 years, well, let's say 2 years, when it comes to investing in startups, in the last 2 years, under constant pressure in the war, in a country that's in the war, I really take my hat off of the way they've developed and they've moved forward. Some people might argue that, they should do more, this and that, but at the same time, I've really seen a lot of development as well. And when you think of the, being in the war while doing all these things, it's really one should really appreciate the development.
Deborah, I want to dig in a bit to this idea that what Russia really, unfortunately, cracks is scale. And of course, there's the China element. We seem to be really sticking our heads in the sand about the scale of Chinese support for Russia. And indeed, the mask slipped recently when I think a deputy Chinese foreign minister in Europe said that China cannot afford for Russia to lose. Now, they didn't say Russia should win, which is interesting. That reflects very much, unfortunately, the language of Biden as well. Ukraine must not fall, but no mention of it winning. It seems sort of almost mirrored by the Chinese thing. But it is concerning because, of course, China has not just the manufacturing capability to support Russian, dare I say it, scale up as opposed to innovation, but also North Korea would not be sending an additional 30,000 troops, combat troops. It would not be sending the rumored 20,000 engineers to help Russia scale up its Shahed manufacturing. It would not provide all these components and give a green light to all of this unless it was far more involved in this and in some ways saw Russia as a proxy for its own foreign policy goals. I know that's slightly off the innovation, but it does really relate to how Russia is able to scale up its more basic technologies, which unfortunately have an impact.
I think you are absolutely correct in everything you just said. We may be talking about technology and innovation, but there are obviously absolutely massive geopolitical implications of what is happening, behind all of this. There's a few things that popped into my head. So one of the reasons that the Russians, are reaching out to the North Koreans and we'll just start with the North Koreans. They had originally sent a batch of 10,000 soldiers. It's expected that there's another 30 that are being deployed in the near future. They know that there are North Koreans, exactly what you said. They're sending engineers, they're sending factory workers. So all of this is taking place in Russia. So it is both doing production within Russia, but it is also teaching all of these people so they have this capability that they can then take back to North Korea. In the context of what's going on with China, and here's a nice way to tie it back into what Jan was just saying, whenever the Ukrainians find downed Russian kit, whatever it is, whether it's the missiles, whether it's drones, they do postmortems on them and they pull them apart and to understand what is going on, what are the technologies, how are things evolving on the technology side. Almost every single time that they are pulling these new pieces apart, the more recent ones that are being taken down, there are new and different components in there. I will also just say there was a drone that was shot. Well, I'll say it was picked up in the last week or so. There were NVIDIA chips in there apparently. So this, there is all kind. And now that is not to imply that NVIDIA or the United States or anything like that is directly supplying it, but it means that there are supply chains that are being able to take some of these things and bring them in and supply them to the Russians. There's actually some really funny ones of Chinese kit, like electronic boards and things like that, in some of these pieces. And it's kind of these crazy /Chinese/Russian language words that you can sort of recognize, but not really, because it's the Chinese writing in Russian. And, those get sent around and they kind of laugh, but it's really indicative of how much, especially on the electronics and the fiber optics that Jan was talking about, all of these things continue to find their way into what's happening within kind of the Russian production and arsenal space. It cannot be denied. And the West's approach to this or non-approach to this, I think, is deeply puzzling for an awful lot of people who so clearly see that there are these alignments, there are these alliances, and that there really has not been much done to address any of it other than sanctions and Ukrainians fighting and dying. And at some point, this is no longer going to be contained just to the Eastern Front within Ukraine. And, just exactly like you see with Putin, the longer and the more that somebody is allowed to get away with, and the further they kind of inch along, and the more cables they cut up in the Baltic Sea, or the more cyber attacks that have been, deployed across Europe, and that there's, just no response, it emboldens these continued actions. And so from my perspective in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are going to keep fighting no matter what. This is sovereignty, this is existence, this is not a negotiable thing at this point, when Russia continues to demand demilitarization and denazification as baseline for conversation, which is a complete non-starter. So this is not just Ukraine, Russia here now. This is already a bigger, wider systemic geopolitical event that is happening on many levels. And for anybody who is not paying attention to it or thinks it's not going to end up in their backyard someday, is really just not paying attention. We'll go back to Jan and, the Finns not trusting from way back when. I think more people should be hanging around with the Finns. Let the Finns share a little bit more of their history and what they know.
Estonians and Finns, we've got to be listening to those guys a little bit more. I mean, we don't have a huge amount of time, but the last area I wanted to focus on is an interesting one because we support Ukrainian spirit in thoughts and prayers, as the phrase goes. And Europe is starting to ramp up its defense production. We've got the 3.5% of GDP. Now, obviously, that's over a decade. not nearly fast enough for the pace at which geopolitical events are moving, but we are starting to sort of dust off our supply chains and retool our militaries. However, there's an elephant in the room here. We may be putting huge amounts of money that Ukraine could only dream of, but we're already putting it into things like nuclear. We're putting it into large, expensive platforms, armored vehicles, Leopards, which was announced this week. I mean, yes, great stuff, but what Ukrainians tell me, and I know this is an experience you've had as well, that there are many Western companies and countries who are sending drones and technology to Ukraine in the belief that it is helping. But this stuff comes, I would say, almost like an iPhone, unpackable, as it were. You can't deconstruct, reconfigure, fine-tune the frequencies, swap in different components, etc. It's not open source tech. And it arrives and it's redundant. It's expensive. It takes a long time to deliver. It's soaking up funds. And when it arrives, it's useless. And it gets stuck in a warehouse and there's nothing anyone can do. It can't even be taken apart and retooled at the front. If this is going on, I don't know how widespread it is, then surely all the investment in our expensive platforms is for nothing because we do not have the ability to protect them against Russian innovation in drone warfare. They'll be turned into scrap metal faster than we can blink.
I don't know where to start. There's many sides to that. Not all of it is useless. There's good stuff. Also, when I talked about Finland learning from Ukraine, it's a two-way street. Obviously, we have a lot of high level research innovation happening in the universities in Finland. I know Nokia has been supplying them with Banshee radio sets, Ukraine as an example, high technology 5G networks on the battlefront. They've been working together with operators there. When it comes to procurement, if I look at Finland, I'm sure it applies to a lot of European countries as well. For example, we just ordered more artillery, like howitzers, like artillery on the wheels. Let's put it this way. I think we bought like about 90 of them from South Korea, K9s they're called, super high quality. We just made the decision before the escalation of Ukrainian war. They're still needed. And a process of procuring those, it's a long process, obviously, for many reasons. It takes years. And when I say years, I mean, closer to 10 years probably than 5. But, it's a long process and we still need them. But when it comes to drones and the technology, like the aerodynamics doesn't change. That we more or less know how that functions. What changes in those whether the drone, let's talk about drones or unmanned technology, small drones, big drones, fixed wing, chopper ones, UGVs, ground vehicles, unmanned technology. What changes is the operating in the GPS denied environment, being off the signal, basically. So, I mean, just for those of the listeners who, but once there's a signal, it can be spoofed or jammed. If there's no signal, you have to kinetically destroy the vessel. So those technology, like target AI in the machinery, when it comes to target recognition, target locking, that changes quicker. The software is a bigger thing than aerodynamics, obviously. So when I think of Finland or any other country into Europe, what we need now is small patches of different drones to educate, to train our pilots, the drone pilots. So yesterday, our partner, Double Tap partner, Mikko-Pekka Hanski, his oldest son went to start his military service yesterday. 12,500 new kids joined. This happens several times a year yesterday, and they will be trained. What we need to do is to train them to use the drone. So when the new drone comes, if they're capable pilots, they pick up the new technology faster, obviously. So we need to procure, we need to learn, and then work together with Ukraine at the moment. But it's not. There's a lot of faults in the system. If I get back to Jonathan, if I understood your comment, there's a lot of faults. But I think we're also doing a lot of right things. And also we should remember, if I know something, what I know is just a surface. Well, what Deborah knows, or you know what I mean? Like what Finnish military does, for example. I don't think, I only think operational security. I only probably know just a little tiny bit. And even the bits that I know, I don't want to say out loud. But I'm just saying that they're doing a lot of right things. Let's put it this way. Also, we could be better, but I'm not too worried.
Well, Deborah, let's get your perspective on this, because I don't necessarily want to name countries that are doing this, and of course it may not be universal. But how do we transform so that the learning becomes a two-way street, so that we're not providing things to Ukraine that is redundant? And if we are providing things that are out of date, we're able to make some of the components and the software sort of hot swappable, so Ukrainian innovation at the front can make some use, rather than just chucking this stuff in the bin.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. So first, if you think about, and what you were mentioning before with a lot of the defense spending that's going on with the Leopards and procurement of a lot of what you can call the old military kit or technologies, there is still a need for that. I am absolutely not saying that there is not, but much of it actually does need to be updated to actually what Jan was talking about. There is electronic warfare, GPS denial, some of the ways in which the operating systems need to be updated. So there is that piece. A lot of money is going to be spent on that, but if that is all you're relying on, you're actually fighting an old war. You are not fighting a new war, and you are not prepared to fight the new war. And that's where it sort of goes into what we can call new defense tech or new offensive tech in the context of what is happening here. And the way that these two work together, the Ukrainians have been doing this now for 3 years. They have definitely absolutely benefited from the old tech or the old kit that was included. But a lot of, we'll call it the more new tech that is coming in, is the stuff that is actually ending up in warehouses that is not prepared for the, what's happening out on the front line. Every single company in Europe or the United States that is doing any kind of this new defense technology, be it drones, UAVs, sea drones, ground drones, should absolutely be testing in Ukraine. If their things have not been tested in a live battlefield environment, I can almost guarantee it is probably not going to work once it kind of hits a real world environment. And again, it's not that it's bad tech in and of itself, but so much of what is happening is people don't know what they don't know. And that's actually sort of where we started this conversation, is people outside do not understand how much has changed and what needs to be done. And I'll just give you a quick example. There's a lot of different manufacturers of drones in like especially little FPVs here. And everybody thinks, oh, well, an FPV is an FPV and they just get all shipped out to the front. But what works with a particular antenna in Kharkiv is actually not going to be the same thing that works with that antenna down in, Mykolaiv or Donetsk or something like that, because the Russians are using different radio frequencies and different techniques in different places. So there is no such thing as one size fits all. And this, I think, is where there is such an incredible and such an important opportunity that can and should be taken advantage of in the context of learning both, bringing some of this new Western kit, some of these ideas, bringing them to Ukraine. Let them fail. Don't be afraid to say, I brought my stuff to Ukraine and it failed, but we stayed and learned and figured it out. And, now it is that much better. If so many more companies would do that, it would be so much better, both for Ukraine as well as for the Western countries they're going back to with this knowledge. Because again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. This is not just Ukraine, Russia, out on the Eastern line. This has implications all the way through the different ecosystems. And, on my LinkedIn page, Jonathan, you're absolutely right. What I know you were sort of moving me towards, I am actually fairly critical of a lot of the Western, like the new defense tech things that are out there. And it's not just me randomly saying this stuff, but literally, if I can, after looking at all these companies and knowing very quickly what you have to look for, you can see very quickly if a company probably is not checking the boxes. It doesn't matter if it's big and sexy and it has lots of, knives sticking out of it, whatever you think looks scary. If the software inside is not, updatable, if it is not, doesn't have the capabilities to fly when in GPS or GPS denied or electronic warfare environment, all of these things are actually the things that matter at this point. What is inside the software right now is far more important. And again, this is actually still one of the really biggest vulnerabilities, a lot of Western tech, old tech included, because they are built on these, exquisite systems that are perfectly closed. And exactly like you said, an iPhone is a great comparison. That does not work if all of a sudden one thing changes and you can't make updates. It has the way defense technology and offensive technology has to be built going forward is to allow for changes, because change, electronic change, technology change is the name of the game that we are seeing right now.
Guess it's the same with AI. You might have the fanciest sort of AI autonomous systems in the world in some kind of field test or some kind of, non-battlefield test. But, unless you've actually tested it in the field against Russian armor, yeah, it's not worth anything because it may not be able to navigate real world obstacles.
Yeah. Although I have to say AI has been extraordinary, and I have seen literally just huge jumps in the quality of certain kinds of things within again, it's largely software driven, but the Ukrainians have been collecting data on everything since the beginning of the war. They have, just troop movements and photographs of everything that's out there and visuals of the battlefields and, patterns that have, you can emerge as AI, particularly within the last year, when they have started laying AI algorithms over these massive, massive data sets that they have. I have seen absolute huge leaps forwards in the context of the quality and the accuracy and the precision of what the Ukrainians are developing, because they are now, with this AI, able to go through just those enormous data sets, the LLMs of everything that they have. And so that is absolutely changing, for the Ukrainians, definitely for the better in terms of making everything much more precise and accurate.
And LWM, a large war model, I guess, which is.
Yeah.
Jan, you wanted to jump in and say a few words about what we were discussing there.
Yeah, just one more or less incredible comment that I heard last year. But first of all, I have to say that that's a good point about data sets. Those are incredibly valuable and desired at the moment around the world, what Ukrainians have gathered. That's that I don't hear enough, actually. That's a huge thing. But a comment on developing the drones. Last year, I heard this comment on from a big, sexy drone producer in continental Europe. I asked them, I said, have you been testing? Have you tried these on in Ukraine? Because, I saw a few things that I was kind of thinking, they said, no, 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 we don't want to go there. I said, okay, boy, please explain, because I would have thought that, even though it was not like a defense product itself, in itself, but aiming with that direction later. They said, no, no, because we have a good amount of sales at the moment. And if we go to Ukraine, they want to change some stuff anyway. So we don't want to change any stuff because we have a lot of orders in. And I'm thinking, like, I'm 100% sure they would suggest some changes. I know that, but that's kind of why I asked. But that's how incredible it can be in certain things. Because as they say, if in defense tech, if you're not in Ukraine, you don't exist at the moment. It's as simple as that. But that's just a comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
incredibly important. Yeah.
just to loop back, if we look at then where we are here and where we are going forward, and I think this actually, both Jan and I had spoken to this a little bit. This is not just an ecosystem that is defending Ukraine. It is first and foremost doing that, but this is truly an extraordinary ecosystem that, as it starts turning towards the West, is going to be bringing information, knowledge, products, databases, the AI that's already been written to be able to extract what is need to be known, and bringing these new products out to the West. And call it Silicon Valley in the 90s. Actually, you can talk about Israel and how, their whole ecosystem just took off tremendously after in the 90s as well. And a lot of that actually came out of the fighting that the Israelis were doing. And so this ecosystem is not going away when the war ends. First and foremost, Ukraine is going to have a very strong, very self-sufficient ecosystem going forward. However this war ends, Russia is still going to be the neighbor. And so, there is going to be the market here, but there is absolutely the market on the outside. And, when we do our due diligence onto these Ukrainian companies, we are not comparing them against just this ecosystem. We look at their technology and bring in experts from the West to look at it versus, what is out there in the West. Can this product stand up out there? And, Jan, I know you guys do this too. We are all looking at these companies. It is not philanthropic, investing that we are doing. We absolutely firmly believe there are business cases for this in the context of these are doing amazing things here, and we know that the gaps are out there in the other markets, and that there are opportunities for sales and growth outside of Ukraine as well. And so there's a very strong business case for this, both with Ukraine's defense ecosystem that will continue to grow, but also beyond Ukraine's borders.
And to sort of wrap that up, I think the idea that you're in this business to back winners is important. And I think changing the narrative about Ukraine is important as well. We were talking about that before we hit record. Not to portray, Ukraine as a victim, which of course it is, a victim of aggression. Not to, in some way, sort of only sort of focus on that angle, but talk about strength, talk about innovation, talk about the ability to be victorious. To portray Russia as essentially a loser, which in many instances it actually is. And I think that's an important way to change the narrative. And I think technology is one of these angles, which is incredibly important to use as a kind of lever to change those perceptions and narratives. Because after all, Trump likes backing winners. At the moment, he's almost certainly not backing Ukraine because, in his own mind and those around him, Ukraine is being framed as weak, small, and losing, none of which is true.
Ukraine is fierce, strong, and standing up, and it has lasted. Again, I'll go back from 3 days to 3.5 years, and what it has done to the Russian economy. Russia is now importing soldiers from North Korea. Russia has to get supplies from China. None of those are of a country that is strong. They keep losing their ministers out of windows or things like that. When somebody makes problems, they have all kinds of problems going on up there right now. So no, I don't think anybody here sort of portrays or feels that victim is such a funny word because there's two ways to look at it. It is something that happens to somebody. Okay, you are a victim of this, but then there's victim mentality, which means I'm going to continue in this position of where something was done to me. And the Ukrainians are the complete opposite. Nobody is feeling themselves a victim. They're like, this has happened. This is our response. We will stand up and fight. We will stand up and stay. And so it's not in the context of, feeling sorry for themselves. I don't think that I just don't ever hear that. It is what has happened has happened. This is totally wrong on so many levels, internationally, morally, culturally, everything. But we are going to stand and do what we need to do to protect our people, protect our sovereignty, protect the international rule of law. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah. That's a good place to stop. I don't know if you have a last word there, Jan. Yep.
Yeah, there's no other option. I think in Finland and in Ukraine, any Russian neighboring country, any nation, we know what the option is. If the Russians take over, we know what's going to happen. So we refuse to take that option, and it doesn't mean courage is not. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. I mean, a sane person gets afraid sometimes, but what it means that you take action despite of being afraid, and that's what the Ukrainians are doing. Well, one of the first days that I was in Kharkiv, like I said, in the early days of this full-scale invasion, there's some old ladies while I was helping them, and I was getting a little emotional because things were so bad. They asked me to sit down and asked if I wanted something. I said, listen, no, that's not the way. That's when I decided that I'll do whatever I can to work with these people. The courage is, if I had 10% of that courage of those old ladies, I'd conquer the world.
What a beautiful place to end the episode, and so incredibly important that people understand the resilience, the strength, the courage, the will, and the commitment to democracy, freedom that Ukrainians have. Deborah and Jan, thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you so much for coming on the channel today to give us an update on tech, innovation, and the will to resist Russian aggression.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.